Good morning, and welcome to our daily devotion video here at Mount Calvary Lutheran Church for Friday, November 14th. My name is Vicar Zachary. This week, we've been wrapping up our discussion on joining Jesus on his mission by looking at 5 missional practices that help us to be better Christians and to be better missionaries. Today, we conclude by looking at chapter 16, Ministering Through Prayer. Now, I will be honest, it took me a little while to get to chapter 16. It took me long enough that most people that were reading the book for this leadership conference on November 1st managed to get to it before I did. So I was given a lot of forewarning that this is an incredible chapter. It is titled Ministering Through Prayer. And I will be honest with you, I think that's a terrifying title. The chapter really focuses on spontaneous prayer and using prayer in a one-on-one or a one-on-two conversation to remind people of the gospel message and to share with them the comfort that Jesus provides. And I will speak from my own experience, and I don't think I'm alone here. Spontaneous prayer is terrifying. In my first couple of years at seminary, even though I was being trained as a church worker, I still, at any opportunity in which there was a possibility that someone might ask me to pray, I was preparing it probably 30 minutes ahead of time because I did not want to be caught in the situation in which somebody asked me to pray and I'm not ready. I have to make sure that I have my sentences intact. I want to make sure that I thank God for all the right things. I want to make sure that everyone feels that I have said the appropriate length. I don't want it to be too long or too short, and therefore people be annoyed. And all this, step after step after step after step, made prayer exhausting, and it made prayer terrifying because I have to be ready. So when I reached chapter 16, and it's telling me that, probably the best way, or one of the best ways in which I can share my faith with another person is just ask them in the middle of a conversation after they've shared some trouble if they want to pray right this very moment about that thing. I don't think there could have been a more terrifying ask. And I'll be honest, if I had just picked up the book and started, this video looking at this chapter, I probably would still be very honest with you that I would find that terrifying. But this has been something that's really recent in my own life because I'd heard from Pete about chapter 16. I didn't know it was 16 at the time. About just how Pastor Finke focuses on this spontaneous prayer and how it can be very strong and very, gratifying and edifying and important for me as a Christian, but then also sharing my faith. And I've been thinking about that a lot. So 2 weeks ago, as some of you know, I was guest preaching in Macon. I took the opportunity to go and visit a restaurant that I'd heard about from my pastor in St. Louis. And I don't typically go to places alone. I don't really enjoy going to places like movies or restaurants by myself. But because I'd heard a recommendation about this, that's where I went. And I got in and I sat down at the bar, which is another thing that I'm not super used to doing. And I made an order and I'm sitting there like, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Like, I hope this food is worth it. And then I begin listening in on a conversation to 3 men to the right of me. They're all older, 65 plus, all clearly retired. And I get eventually wrapped into their conversation because it's easy to wrap me into conversations, as many of you know. And I began speaking with a man. I don't know his last name, but his first name is Bill. And I won't share with you many details about Bill's life, but he and I began talking about that he was having some issues after a recent surgery that he had. And I don't know exactly what prompted me to do this, though at this point I can just say it was the Spirit. I asked him if he wanted to pray with me about what he was struggling with. And he said yes. Surprisingly, he said yes. And so I was put in an opportunity and a situation where I had to pray spontaneously for a man I had just met without any prep work. And I won't tell you that the prayer was exceedingly good, but I will tell you is that it changed our entire conversation. It was a short prayer. We prayed for his healing and for his strength, and that he would be able to return to the kind of activities that he wanted to do. But after that point, Bill was practically a different person. He opened up to me about a lot of the other struggles that he was having in his life. He was talking to me about the kinds of, relationship that he had with God, with his church, and about how he was storing up all this guilt, but also looking for meaning. And so what began as a, a 30-second prayer in a restaurant that I didn't know I even was supposed to be at turned into a 90-minute conversation about this man's faith, about this man's relationship with God. And by the time we were done, he was in a much better place spiritually, he was in a much better place emotionally, and he seemed rather resolute that he was going to return back to church. And I won't downplay that prayer was terrifying, but I've kept doing it since that point in phone calls with people from home or with members here, and it's gotten steadily less scary each time I've done it. Because the reality is that God wants us to pray. And much like we talked about earlier this week, God is going to give us the tools. And I'll even say the prayers that I have begun to give spontaneously have gotten dramatically better. And Bill was not the first time, or was not the last time that I've had one of those experiences in the last couple of weeks. Just when I was speaking with a brother at seminary who was struggling with his own vicarage, we prayed about it, and he went from, anxiety ridden and concerned to being much calmer, to being much more stable and much more ready to face the kinds of challenges that God put in front of him. And so I can't give you a silver bullet and say, here's what you do. Prayer doesn't have to be scary anymore. But what I can say is that the best way for us to become less afraid of praying in a spontaneous setting is just to do it and to do it regularly. And not everyone will say yes. I've done prayer walks a few years ago, and there were some people that said, "Nope, I don't really want anything to do with you or your church. I don't need prayers. I'm just going to live my life." But I have found that 60 to even 80% of people will say yes, that they do, that they need a prayer in this moment. And they will be shocked if you ask to do it right then, because we're in a community and a culture that is very used to the phrase, I will keep you in my prayers. And if you do, great. But most of us just say that as a way of taking the next step and getting out of the conversation, or by moving on and saying that we are thinking about them. But actually taking that moment to sit and actually pray with them, even something short like a 30-second prayer, can really bring the good news of Jesus Christ and the comfort that God provides directly into somebody's life. And that is powerful, and that is useful, and that is good for both you and them. It's with that we close off our discussion on joining Jesus on his mission. This is a great book. There are a few chapters in here that we didn't get to just because they don't make a great format for this kind of thing. But I highly recommend that if you do not already have a copy, please reach out to, you can find it online, or if you are close to Mount Calvary, reach out to Pastor Andrew because we still have a couple lying around here. And with that, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week for our daily devotion series, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Blessings.